In my previous post, I misrepresented Asherah, and I said that her name was Astarte. I wanted to correct myself. I think that it's really important to give accurate information, and I misrepresented who she is. And so I wanted to talk to you about who Asherah was. Now, the person I mentioned, or the goddess I mentioned, was Astarte, and that was not the same as Asherah. In the pantheon of gods in the Canaanite area, there were three goddesses. There was Asherah, Astarte, and Anat. And Asherah was the queen mother of them all. She represented fertility, childhood, and motherhood. So she was the goddess of fertility. And she was the goddess over the entire area. And so depending on who her consort was, depending on who that next representative was in the religious belief system of the area. And remember, in my post about the story of religion, you had the high priestess, who sometimes was referred to as the name of the goddess, and she had her consort, who was called the son of the goddess. And so you're going to have different stories about, is this her son? Is this her lover? He was called the son of the goddess, and that was her consort. And so she had several different consorts in the area, and I wanted to tell you their names because you might remember them from the Bible. So there was El. He was considered the creator god, and he was Canaanite. Yahweh was the name of the one the Israelites chose to as their one and only eventually. Amuru was the Amorite god, or consort, not the god. Aru was the Akkadian consort. Am was the Katabian consort. Assur was the Assyrian consort. And Elkinursa was a Hittite consort. And Baal was another consort who was considered the supreme god. Now, Baal's all over the Bible. Asherah's in the Bible about 30 times. At some point, Abraham decided that Yahweh needed to be the one and only, and screw Asherah. We're going to get rid of her. If you worship her, then we're going to get you. And so he was trying to vanquish the whole goddess system and just choose Yahweh as the one and only. Now, that gets us to a point of thinking of, why do we believe what we believe based upon where we're from? Because, when I went to Greece in 2013, I learned that in the Greek stories that a lot of those gods and demigods and stuff, they were actual people at some point. Hercules was a guy who helped at the Olympic Village. He was an athlete, and later on he was a coach, and he became this, very powerful person. There's all these different people who were actually people in prehistoric times, that they kind of were utilized in the stories that later become part of their religion in those areas. And so I want us to think about those stories, because I think that we call them myths when they're not ours, and we call them the stories when they are ours. And just with creation, let's think about creation for just a second. Do you know how many creation stories there are? I'm not even going to call it myths. I'm just going to call them all stories. There are literally thousands of creation stories by every group of people on the planet. In China, you've got the Pangu, Nuwa, Yami. You've got the Aboriginal one in Australia. You've got the Mayan, the Incan, and all the different groups of people that were part of them. You've got Aztec, Iroquois, Navajo, Norse, Finnish, Germanic, Slav. You've got the European story of Manu and Yemo, the cosmogonic egg. And then there's different types of creation stories. There's so many that they've divided them into categories. And the way you know what you're going to believe is where you're born and who your parents are, essentially. And the thing they have in common is that they all have meaning in those specific stories. And I think that, as I told you in the story of religion a little bit, and also in my book, Who Am I? A Deep Dive Through Spiritual Wounding to Identity, I tell the story about why the Israelites chose the specific symbols in their creation story, because they had a purpose of getting rid of Asherah, and that was all connected. So I'm just trying to give a context to the story of the story of the story of religion, and how that comes to be where you are. Now, if you want more information about Asherah and her consorts, there's several really good books out there. I'm going to give you 3. If you want to Google books some more or look through a bookstore, there's Asherah, the Queen of Heaven by Baal Kadmon. There's Asherah, History's Vanquished Goddess by Darlene Cronk. no, cosmic, sorry. And there is the early history of God, Yahweh, and the other deities in the ancient, let me say it again. The early history of God, Yahweh, and the other deities in ancient Israel by Mark Smith. And so if you want to do a deep dive into God, there you go. The God that you probably learn in the Judeo-Christian world. There's a lot of information, and it's often interesting to research the history of the history, but it can feel kind of wonky to start exploring what we've been told versus what we learn from scientists, from historians, from other folks. I want to encourage you to do the deep dive, to kind of just explore. I think history is very interesting and it tells our story. And so I encourage you to embrace it. If you have any questions or comments, please comment in my section here below. I'm interested to hear from you. So let me correct again. My correction from the previous post of child sacrifice in the church was that Astarte was not the queen mother of them all. Asherah was the queen mother of them all. Thanks for your time. I'll see you soon.